What if you didn't find this video at the right time by accident? What if September is arriving at the exact moment you are finally ready to release a version of yourself that has been exhausted, afraid, and quietly asking for change? Maybe you have felt strange lately, more emotional, more tired, more reflective, less interested in people who once mattered so much, less satisfied with goals you used to chase. You may not even know exactly what is wrong. You simply know that something has changed. And perhaps that feeling is more important than you realize, because sometimes your life begins changing internally long before anything changes on the outside. You stop tolerating what you once tolerated. You become tired of explaining yourself. You start questioning the choices you made from fear. You begin wanting peace more than approval. You begin wanting meaning more than appearances. And suddenly the life you built starts feeling strangely unfamiliar. If this video found you in September, I don't want you to treat it as a prediction that some magical event is guaranteed to happen. Life doesn't work that way. But I do want you to treat this moment as an invitation to pay attention, because September naturally creates a sense of transition. One season begins moving toward another. The year is moving forward. And sometimes that external transition reminds us of internal transitions we have been avoiding. You begin asking, what am I still carrying? What am I ready to release? What kind of life do I actually want? What am I no longer willing to tolerate? And perhaps those questions are more important than any prediction about your future, because your life changes when your choices change, and your choices change when your awareness changes. So if you are here now, listen carefully. There may be 6 quiet signs that you are entering a different chapter. The first is that the old version of your life no longer feels emotionally satisfying. You may still have the same job, the same home, the same responsibilities, the same relationships, but something feels different. What once seemed exciting now feels empty. What once felt important now feels exhausting. You may have achieved things you once dreamed about and still feel strangely disconnected. And you may wonder, why am I not happier? Maybe because happiness was never the real problem. Maybe alignment is. You can create a life that looks successful while feeling completely disconnected from yourself. You can choose a career because it impresses people. You can stay in a relationship because being alone scares you. You can chase money because you believe achievement will finally make you feel worthy. You can stay constantly busy because silence makes you uncomfortable. And eventually, something inside you begins saying, I don't want this anymore. That realization can be frightening, because the old life may not be terrible. It may simply no longer fit. And that's an important distinction. You don't always leave something because it is bad. Sometimes you leave because you have changed. Your values changed. Your priorities changed. Your capacity changed. Your understanding changed. What worked for you 5 years ago may not work now. That does not mean you failed. It means you are alive. The second sign is that you are becoming much less tolerant of pretending. You used to say, it's fine. It doesn't bother me. I can handle it. They didn't mean it. I'll just keep going. But now your body and mind aren't cooperating with the lie. You are tired of saying yes when you mean no. Tired of pretending you aren't hurt. Tired of acting like a relationship is healthy when it repeatedly drains you. Tired of working beyond your limits and calling it ambition. Tired of carrying everyone else's emotions. This is where awareness can become uncomfortable, because once you see a pattern, you cannot easily pretend you don't see it. You may begin noticing how often you abandon yourself to keep peace, how often you explain your needs away, how often you forgive things that repeatedly hurt you, how often you confuse being needed with being loved. And perhaps September becomes a psychological checkpoint. You look back at the year and realize, I have been carrying this for too long. That realization can become powerful when you don't use it to shame yourself. Instead, ask, what would change if I finally took my own needs seriously? Maybe the answer is a boundary. Maybe it is rest. Maybe it is a conversation. Maybe it is leaving something. Maybe it is asking for professional help. The third sign is that you are craving simplicity. You may suddenly feel less interested in noise, less interested in social media, less interested in endless conversations, less interested in proving that you are successful. You want quiet. You want meaningful relationships. You want time to think. You want nature. You want rest. You want a life that feels real rather than impressive. This can feel strange when you live in a culture that constantly tells you to want more. More money, more attention, more followers, more achievements, more productivity. But maybe you don't need more. Maybe you need less of what is draining you. Less comparison, less emotional chaos, less overcommitment, less pretending, less urgency. Sometimes healing begins when you stop asking, "What else can I add?" and start asking, "What can I remove? What responsibility isn't actually yours? What relationship repeatedly exhausts you? What habit keeps you overstimulated? What expectation are you carrying simply because you are afraid to disappoint someone? What are you doing because everyone else expects it?" This is where your life can become lighter, not because you suddenly get everything you want, because you stop carrying what you never needed. The fourth sign is that you are beginning to understand your patterns differently. Maybe you have spent years asking, "Why am I like this? Why do I overthink? Why do I trust the wrong people? Why do I become anxious when someone is distant? Why do I keep saying yes? Why do I feel guilty when I rest? Why do I always need to stay busy?" But instead of judging yourself, you become curious. Where did I learn this? What does this behavior protect me from? What am I afraid would happen if I changed it? Maybe you learned early that being useful earned approval, so now you struggle to rest. Maybe you learned that conflict was unsafe, so now you avoid difficult conversations. Maybe you learned that people were unpredictable, so now you monitor everyone's moods. Maybe you learned that vulnerability led to disappointment, so now independence feels safer than intimacy. These patterns don't mean you are broken. They mean you adapted. But adaptation can outlive the situation that created it. A strategy that helped you survive one chapter may become the thing that limits your next chapter. So September can become the month you stop asking, "What is wrong with me?" and start asking, "What did I learn to do in order to feel safe?" That question creates compassion, and compassion creates room for change. The fifth sign is that your relationship with solitude is changing. Maybe you used to fear being alone. You needed constant distraction, messages, entertainment, work, relationships, noise. But now you may be craving quiet. And when you finally get it, something unexpected happens. You begin hearing yourself, your real thoughts, your real feelings, your real desires. You begin realizing how much of your life has been shaped by other people's voices. Family expectations, cultural expectations, social media, friends, past versions of yourself. And you begin asking, "What do I actually want?" That is a powerful question, because many people know what they are supposed to want. Few know what they genuinely want. Maybe you don't want the career everyone thinks is impressive. Maybe you don't want a huge social circle. Maybe you don't want to spend your life proving something. Maybe you want a slower life. Maybe you want meaningful work. Maybe you want deeper relationships. Maybe you want to create. Maybe you want peace. There is nothing wrong with wanting a life that doesn't look impressive from the outside. A meaningful life is not required to satisfy everyone else's expectations. And perhaps solitude is teaching you that your own voice deserves a seat at the table. The sixth sign is that you are becoming less desperate for control. This is one of the deepest changes. You begin realizing that you cannot control every outcome. You cannot control whether someone chooses you. You cannot control whether an opportunity works. You cannot control how people interpret you. You cannot control the future. You cannot control every loss. And trying to do so can exhaust you. You check, you analyze, you predict, you rehearse, you seek reassurance. You imagine every possible disaster, but eventually you recognize something. Control is not the same as safety. Sometimes the attempt to control everything creates more anxiety than the uncertainty itself, so you begin practicing a different sentence. I will do what is mine to do, and I will release what isn't. You prepare, you communicate, you make responsible decisions, you care for yourself, and then you allow reality to unfold. Not because you know everything will work out, because you are learning to trust yourself to respond when things change. That is a deeper kind of security. Security not in certainty, security in your ability to adapt. And if you have been feeling this shift recently, comment 777. Not because the number itself has magical power. Let it be a symbol of intention. Let 777 mean, I am ready for a new chapter. I am ready to stop repeating old patterns. I am ready to release what no longer belongs to me. I am ready to listen to myself. I am willing to choose differently. The transformation will not happen because you typed 3 numbers. It happens because you become more conscious of what you do next. The conversation you finally have. The boundary you finally set. The habit you finally change. The person you finally stop chasing. The rest you finally allow. The help you finally accept. That is where your life begins changing. Now there is something very important I want to tell you about September. Don't turn this month into another deadline for becoming a completely different person. You do not need to enter September with a perfect plan. You do not need to become your best self overnight. You do not need to fix everything before the year ends. That pressure can become another form of self-abandonment. Instead, use this period to become honest. What is working? What is not? What are you carrying? What are you avoiding? What have you outgrown? What keeps draining you? What keeps giving you energy? And perhaps one question matters above all: what am I ready to stop doing to myself? Maybe you are ready to stop insulting yourself after mistakes. Maybe you are ready to stop chasing people who give you inconsistent attention. Maybe you are ready to stop saying yes when you are exhausted. Maybe you are ready to stop comparing your timeline to someone else's. Maybe you are ready to stop treating rest as a weakness. Maybe you are ready to stop living as though everyone's happiness is your responsibility. These decisions may not look dramatic, but they can completely change the direction of a life. Because your life is built from repeated behaviors, small choices, every day. And perhaps your next chapter will begin with one small choice that seems insignificant at first. You say no, you go to bed earlier, you ask for help, you stop checking, you take a walk, you tell the truth, you stop explaining yourself, you leave a conversation that always makes you feel smaller. You finally make the appointment you've been postponing. The choice itself may be small, but it tells your nervous system something new. My needs matter. I can trust myself. I don't have to live the old way. And repeat it enough times, that becomes identity. There is another sign that your life may be changing. You no longer want to be understood by everyone. You realize that some people will misunderstand your boundaries. Some will criticize your decisions. Some will miss the old version of you. And that is okay. You don't have to make every person comfortable with your evolution. If someone only liked you when you had no boundaries, their discomfort does not automatically mean your boundary is wrong. If someone only valued you when you were endlessly available, your absence may reveal the nature of the relationship. If someone preferred you when you never disagreed, your honesty may feel like a problem to them. But you cannot build a meaningful life while constantly editing yourself for other people's comfort. You are allowed to change. You are allowed to become quieter. You are allowed to become more selective. You are allowed to have different values than you had before. And perhaps one of the most beautiful signs of change is when you no longer feel the need to announce it. You simply live differently. You don't tell everyone that you are healing. You set the boundary. You don't tell everyone that you are becoming more peaceful. You stop participating in unnecessary conflict. You don't tell everyone that you are learning self-respect. You stop begging people to choose you. You don't tell everyone that you are becoming confident. You stop needing approval for every decision. The transformation becomes visible through your behavior, quietly. And maybe that is why the title says your life is about to change. Because sometimes the change has already started. It just hasn't become visible yet. The internal decision comes first. The external result comes later. And if you are in that phase right now, don't underestimate it. You may feel uncertain. You may feel tired. You may feel emotional. You may not have all the answers. That doesn't mean you're failing. It may simply mean you are between versions of yourself. The old identity no longer fits. The new identity isn't fully formed. This middle space can feel lonely, but it is also where possibility lives. You can ask, who do I want to be now? Not who you were supposed to be, not who your family expected, not who your past demanded. Who do you want to be now? Maybe you want to be calmer, more honest, more present, more selective, more compassionate, more disciplined, more creative, more connected. Whatever it is, start behaving like that person in small ways. You don't need to wait until you feel completely different. Action can precede identity. You become someone who respects their boundaries by setting one. You become someone who trusts themselves by making a decision and following through. You become someone who rests by actually resting. You become someone who values connection by telling the truth. You become someone who is present by putting the phone down and looking at the person in front of you. Your next chapter isn't something you discover, it is something you participate in creating. And perhaps that is the real message of this moment. Not, September will magically fix your life. But September can become the moment you stop postponing the life you know you need. That is much more powerful. You do not need to know how everything will end. You need to decide how you want to participate. And perhaps you have spent enough time asking, what will happen to me? It's time to ask, what will I choose? There is another change that may surprise you. You may begin losing interest in proving people wrong. For a long time, anger can fuel ambition. I'll show them. I'll prove them wrong. They'll regret underestimating me. And sometimes, that energy gets you through difficult years. But eventually, you may reach a point where you think, I don't want to spend my life building something just to prove a point. You want to build it because it matters to you. That is freedom. You are no longer organizing your future around the people who hurt you. You are organizing it around your own values. You don't need revenge. You don't need recognition. You don't need everyone to understand what they lost. You just need to live. And perhaps September is a good time to ask, if nobody knew what I was doing, would I still want to do it? That question can reveal what is authentic, because when there is no audience, the truth often becomes clearer. And maybe the next chapter of your life needs less performance and more presence, less proving and more living, less chasing and more choosing, less control and more trust, less noise and more awareness, less self-criticism and more honest self-respect. So if you're feeling emotional this September, don't automatically assume something is wrong. Emotions can become more noticeable when life slows down enough for you to feel them. You may be grieving. You may be releasing. You may be realizing that a dream no longer fits. You may be discovering a boundary you need. You may be noticing how exhausted you have been. Let the feeling exist. You don't have to turn every feeling into a crisis. You don't have to turn every feeling into a spiritual message either. Sometimes you simply need to feel. And if the emotion becomes overwhelming or interferes significantly with daily life, reaching out to a qualified professional can be an important step. Healing is not something you have to prove you can do alone. Maybe the biggest change coming into your life is not external at all. Maybe it is the relationship you have with yourself. You start speaking to yourself differently. Instead of, I should be further ahead, you say, I am where I am, and I can move forward. Instead of, why am I like this? You say, what did I learn? Instead of, I need everyone to understand. You say, I can honor my truth even when others disagree. Instead of, I have to control this. You say, I will do what I can and respond to what comes. Instead of, I need to become someone better, you say, I need to become more honest. That change in language can lead to a change in behavior, and behavior becomes a life. So perhaps this is the moment to stop waiting for a sign. Perhaps this video itself doesn't need to predict anything. Perhaps the sign is simply your willingness to listen, the willingness to admit, I am ready for something different. That is enough. Because the next chapter doesn't require you to know the ending. It requires you to stop repeating the beginning. Stop repeating the same reaction. Stop repeating the same boundary violations. Stop repeating the same relationship pattern. Stop repeating the same self-criticism. Stop repeating the same avoidance. Start somewhere small. And if you fall back into an old pattern, don't say, I ruined everything. Say, I noticed it. I can choose differently again. You don't need perfection. You need practice. And perhaps that's the final message I want to leave with you. September may or may not bring the external event you are hoping for. No one can honestly guarantee that. But you can guarantee one thing. You can choose to enter this month more consciously than the last. You can release one thing, change one habit, set one boundary, tell one truth, take one meaningful action. And those small decisions can become the beginning of something much larger. One day, you may look back and realize, that was the month I stopped chasing. That was the month I started listening to myself. That was the month I finally rested. That was the month I chose peace. That was the month I stopped needing everyone's approval. That was the month I began again. Maybe nobody else noticed. Maybe there was no dramatic announcement. Maybe nothing looked different from the outside. But inside, something changed. And sometimes, that is how the most important chapters begin. Quietly, without applause, without certainty, with one decision. So if this video found you in September, don't ask only, what is about to happen to me? Ask, what am I ready to change? What am I ready to release? What am I ready to stop tolerating? What am I ready to begin? And perhaps the answer is closer than you think. Not in a prediction, not in a sign, in you, in your choices, in your boundaries, in your courage, in your willingness to become someone who no longer needs to abandon themselves to survive. Maybe September won't magically change your life. Maybe you'll change the way you live your life in September. And that may be even more powerful, because when you change your relationship with yourself, you change the choices you make. When you change your choices, you change your patterns. When you change your patterns, you change the direction of your life. So take the next honest step. You do not need to see the whole road. You only need enough courage to move. And perhaps months from now, you'll look back at this moment and understand. The change didn't begin when something happened to me. It began when I decided to stop waiting for something outside me to give me permission to change. It began when I finally listened. It began when I stopped abandoning myself. It began when I chose to become more honest. And perhaps that is the real message this September. Your life does not need to become perfect. It needs to become more yours. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are.